Okay, so this is on social engineering response, the psychopathic profile. So before we begin, a note about profiling and psychological instruments. To evaluate people for psychopathy, this really should be left up to professionals. I'm not trying to say that arrogantly. It's just that it is. I'm actually not qualified to do it, but and the reason being is that we're going to touch on the psychopathic profile. Oh, yeah, okay. We're going to touch on the psychopathic profile. And psychopathy can mask itself. They can be, if you see yourself or if you feel like somebody you know fits this, really you want to talk to a mental health professional. And the real reason being is that it may be nothing. There are traits for other disorders that mask psychopathy, that look like it, or unfortunately you could actually know a psychopath. Not jokingly, in all seriousness. These people are actually master manipulators, and they can be quite dangerous. So, I mean, you could be in a potentially very bad situation. A quick question. If you saw a photograph, something like a crime scene where someone's head was blown off, what would be your first reaction? Would it be disgust? Would it be horror? Possibly intrigue? So just keep that in mind. We'll revisit that later. So, quick quote, he will choose you, disarm you with his words, and control you with his presence. He will delight you with his wit and plans. He will show you a good time, but you will always get the bill. He will smile and deceive you, and he will scare you with his eyes. And when he is through with you, and he will be through with you, he will desert you and take with him your innocence and your pride. You'll be left much sadder, but not a lot wiser, and for a long time you will wonder what happened and what you did wrong. And if another of his kind comes knocking at your door, will you open it? So this is a quote from a psychopath to a psychologist by the name of Robert Hare. He actually created what they call the psychopathic checklist. He's kind of the father of the industry for treating and diagnosing psychopaths. When I say I'm going to talk about psychopathy in a security conference, everybody looks at me and they're like, why are you giving a talk on that? And it's a really good question. And in truth, why we care is because when it comes to breaking the rules and deceptions, these people are they're the professionals. They're always very charming, and they can be very scary too. They're master manipulators. They are ruthless in pursuit of their goals. Like when they want something, they will stop at nothing to get it. The rest of it's are pawns in their chess games. And hurting you, it doesn't matter to them. And quite honestly, like if you want to talk about their predator-prey relationship, they're actually experts at picking out people they can deceive and manipulate. It's not like them picking the wrong person. They'll eventually find the right one and get it. It might be you, it might not. But they're the experts at it. In truth, the thing that makes them really scary is that they actually have a biological advantage over the rest of us. If you look at psychopaths and where they come from all societies, they come from all races, they come from all socioeconomic backgrounds. We can't say that psychopaths are actually people that, oh, well, if you had parented them differently or if they had not grown up in the hood or whatever, they would be different. They're always going to be that way. They don't change. They are predisposed to being who they are. And so there is absolutely no way for us to look at it and say, like, well, we keep the bad people out, because quite possibly when it's one of them, they could be sitting right next to you. Compared to them, we really are amateurs, and the real reason is the deception is actually against our nature. If you think about it evolutionarily, we evolved to cooperate. That's how we survived as society. It's part of the thing that makes us different from other animals. The other thing, too, is that when we grow up, we're taught to get along with people. We're taught to work in groups. They don't believe that. This conditions in us a kind of a fear of getting caught. Kind of that flight or fright response. We have the possibility of something going wrong. We get scared, and that triggers us off. I knew a clinical psychologist who then was a professor, but he, as an example, he said most people get this whole drug stealing thing wrong. And he said everybody thinks that people steal so that they can do drugs. And he says, no, it's not true. He says really what it is they do drugs to calm themselves down to steal. The whole idea being is that how do you what's the easiest way to get out of a building? You walk out the front door and you act like you're there. Them taking drugs allows them to do that. Psychopaths don't have that problem. So psychopaths, the scary thing about it is that they're actually highly narcissistic. They want to be on top, and they are highly impulsive, and they will take big risks to get what they want. Robert Hare announced, he said, you're far more likely to find a psychopath in a boardroom than you are in a janitor's closet. They want to be on top. They want to be in control. Psychologist Kevin Dutton from Cambridge University did a study of the population in England. He sent out a survey, and they kind of rated themselves. There's a self-questionnaire of how far you're in a psychopath. And he found that people like CEOs, religious leaders, heads of states, these are jobs that attract psychopaths. Like, you are far more likely to find it in these jobs than anywhere else. So, for example, there's a guy named Al Dunlap. Oh, I love this quote, by the way. And you should check on him. But I love this quote because essentially, like, every job that I've been in talks about the who moved my cheese. He says, but when I met Al Dunlap, that would be Chainsaw Al Dunlap, former CEO of Sunbeam, a notorious downsaver, he effortlessly turns the psychopath checklist into who moved my cheese. Many items on the checklist he redefines into a manual of how to do well in capitalism. So if you think about this, you're going to see the checklist: ruthless behavior, charmingness, whole things that are actually quite frightening. He says are the things that you want to get ahead, and this is why you know, they want to be CEOs. It falls naturally into them. To them, hurting you is not their fault. And if you listen to them over and over again, they actually say this. Like, they're almost like they are abusers, but they say this. If you're talking, it's like, well, why did you con this person? Why did you commit, mortgage fraud? Why did you beat her? And it's like, well, they deserved it. They let me do it. I was teaching them a lesson, or, they were having a good time. It just, I took the money as an exchange. It's not their fault. To them, they really don't think so. More importantly, the thing that's kind of scary is that society actually rewards their behavior. It's not something like, I want pedophilia, where, it's like if you do something to a kid, society gets angry at you. For them, society actually says, no, you're actually doing a good job, for the most part. A lot of people think the anti-heroes are cool. I mean, I'm not saying that, I've looked at Jack Bauer, anybody's looked at Jack Bauer and called him a psychopath, but how many people think that Jack Bauer torturing the bad guy is okay? I mean, if you listen to American society and they go on, it's like, well, how should we handle the terrorists? Turn Jack Bauer on him. Obviously, he he stomps over people's rights. Like, we don't care as long as he's on our side. And quite honestly, the thing that's a little sad is that having them on your side actually is advantageous from time to time. I want a lawyer who wins. Like, lawyer's a really nice guy. That's nice. I don't care. And really, like, if you have a surgeon who happens to be psychopathic, they're very cool under pressure. They're very calm. I don't want somebody like cutting my heart open by accident because he got a case of nerves. But to them, in truth, the ends really do justify the means. And as a society, we allow that. If you think of, like, how many people have a 401k here? Raise your hands. 401k? Yeah. We want it to make money, right? So, if we invest in a company, or if our people invest in a company and they hire a psychopath as a CEO to downsize, then, for us on the outside, that looks good. Another quote from Ronson actually about Al Dunlapping is, and I realized what a godsend to a corporation a man who enjoys firing people must be. He went into Sunbeam to boost stocks, and he fired, he fired entire people in towns for being in factories and stuff to boost it. And to everybody else on the outside, they're like, wow, Sunbeam stock is really going up. But, they didn't understand. It's like what he's really doing is destroying towns. He's ruining people's lives for their stock. But that's what they paid him to do. Now, here's the thing that's actually really scary about it, is that if a psychopath were like 1 in a million, 1 in 10,000, maybe 1 in 1,000, it really wouldn't be that big of a deal. It'd be like, oh, yeah, well, there are these people here. But, to us, it really doesn't... we don't encounter them that much. In truth, psychopaths are actually about 1% of the society, maybe a little bit less in U.S. society, maybe 100, maybe 150 on the outside. So here's an example. There are 313 million people in the United States. Now, I was a child of the 80s. I clearly remember, like, everywhere I went, AIDS is bad. Make sure that, you're being protective. Don't, watch out for heinous drug use or whatever. They talk about catching HIV, and HIV is a heinous disease. I'm not making fun of it. Currently, there are about 1.1 million people with HIV in the United States. So if you look at it, statistically speaking, you are 3 times more likely to sleep with a psychopath than you are to sleep with someone with HIV. You let that sink in for a moment about how many there actually are. In truth, everybody in this room has probably met one along the way. We just didn't realize it. They could be your boss, your coworker, your friend, your relative, even your spouse. They're very, very charming. They can be very, very controlling, and we get that they want, and then they move along. So, in truth, so before we go into about what is a psychopath, really we kind of have to talk about what isn't one, because society is kind of led us in a direction that's not really true. There were two psychiatrists, a guy named Liested and a guy named Lenkowski, and they did a long-term study over about 3 or 4 years. So they looked at 100 different movies, and they went down and they actually took a really hardcore look. He said they looked at each movie like 2 or 3 times, and they clinically evaluated each person in that movie that was supposed to be a psychopath. So the first person is Anthony Perkins. He played Norman Bates in Psycho. He's actually not really a psychopath. Norman Bates was based off of a killer by the name of Ed Gein, who was in, I'm probably going to butcher the Township, Wisconsin. Now, Ed Gein, when he was eventually caught, he was charged with multiple things. A lot of really weird things, like he would dig up graves and make like jewelry or mantle stands. He was charged with cannibalism and necrophilia. He did actually murder a couple of people, but really, according to their profiling, Bates is actually more of a psychotic than he is a psychopath, and there's actually a clear difference there. But he's not actually the psychopathic profile. The next person, they said, very, very scary individual, probably would not want to go to dinner with him, is Hannibal Lecter. I mean, Hannibal Lecter, very, very scary, but he's kind of this like larger than life individual. He's like the total bad guy package. He's eloquent, he's intelligent, he eats people for dinner, he understands that fava beans go with Chianti. I mean, a really interesting guy, but he's not really as depraved as they should be. And so when you talk about, who is the real psychopath, we kind of have to like clear idea out that it's the image of these two people. Now, in truth, who really is? Anybody here seen the movie Wall Street? Yeah. So if you look at it, Gordon Gekko is actually the guy played by Michael Douglas is actually pretty spot on. I mean, if you watch him, he is charming, he's alluring, but he's also extremely vicious. He doesn't care. He's manipulative. He will push anybody under the bus he needs to. The movie's great because the bad guy loses that in the end. Sorry for anybody I spoiled that for. But other than that, he's actually pretty perfect. He's pretty spot on. The next one, there's a movie called Badlands, and the character Holly, it's actually about two people who went on a killing spree, and I can't remember where, but Holly, actually, if you listen to her narration, that's pretty spot on to what psychopaths are actually like. I hadn't seen the movie, and I actually just like watched part of it to see it because I was so curious. But if you listen to her through the narration, she has almost this monotone voice. I mean, she talks about going with her boyfriend and they go on a killing spree, and the way that she talks about it in the narration, it's pretty much the same thing. It's like, well, we killed a bunch of people and then we went to go get milk. And to them, there's no difference. There's no emotional reaction. In fact, actually, if you want a quick hint, you don't even want to see the movies, I would just go watch both the trailers because it pretty much gives their profiles away to the people we're actually dealing with. Moving on, a quick note about traits and definitions. So psychopathy is actually not listed in the Diagnostic and Statistics Manual. It's not actually. It's a little weird. But it's actually there's kind of a sister diagnosis called antisocial personality disorder, and it's listed as a personality disorder. But there's a variation between the two of them. So if somebody says that they've been diagnosed with ASPD, that does not necessarily mean that they're a psychopath, and vice versa. They can overlap. They can be part of both, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they are. So when looking at diagnosing, there's actually a slight set of a difference in the criteria. In truth, there is a gender bias. Most psychopaths are male, to even a frightening result. Some psychiatrists feel, although I think that's been disproven at this point, that female psychopaths don't even exist. I don't think that's true. I've read other people and they said they've actually run into and diagnosed them. But don't worry, nature isn't sexist. There are other personality disorders that are absolutely as frightening as psychopathy, that are pretty much close cousins. If you think of the movie Fatal Attraction, that would be spot on, or Misery. Those are two pretty excellent examples of it. So, diagnosing a psychopath. So like I said earlier, there's a guy named Robert Hare, and throughout the years he dealt with a lot of, he worked in a lot of maximum security prisons, and in truth he kind of got tired of being caught off guard by them all the time, so he created what they call the Psychopathic Checklist, or the PCL. This is actually what they call the PCLR, Psychopathic Checklist Revised. So he created it and they changed it along the lines, maybe to make more money or something. But there are 2 factors and there are 4 facets. It has 20 different criteria for it, and each criteria is rated between 0 and 2. So for those of us who are math people, that means that you can get a score between 0 and 40. Now, if you look at it, 0 through 20 means that you're non-psychopathic at all. In fact, most people actually rate about a 4 on the scale. So if you look at this and go, oh my God, I'm that person, probably not. Everybody's a little bit psychopathic. I really wanted to fit Butters into that. I just couldn't. So when you, from 0 to 20 is non-psychopathic. Criminals normally rate higher. There are instances where they rate somewhere between 19 and 20. But when you hit that 20 to 30 scale, they call that an indeterminate psychopath or a pseudo-psychopath. There are a lot of different names for them. Pretty much what it means is that the person evaluating you thinks that you have got some issues, but they can't really say for certain. Some people clearly draw the line at 25, but really 20 to 30 is kind of this indeterminate range. They're indeterminate range. So that means that 30 plus, yep, you're one of them. Congratulations, you drew the you won the lottery. And that's how it's rated. Now I've put in bold and underlined the 4 traits for interpersonal. Now, like I said, like all of them, most psychopaths, or all psychopaths, are normally alluring or charming. Or they're very coercive if they're actually not. But they're normally one of those. And if you notice how important this is as far as them being manipulators and charmers, like it's on the checklist. It's not a side item. It's right there. Like this is something that psychologists look for. It's the thing that makes them so dangerous. On the flip side, on facet 4 is the antisocial. So really, you've kind of got 2 classifications of psychopaths. We've got the, the axe murderers and people, the serial killers, and then you've got the people like Gordon Gekko. And really, the key differentiator between them is not that Gordon Gekko is nicer, not in the least. It's the fact that Gordon Gekko doesn't necessarily have these antisocial controls or these antisocial behaviors. They call them successful psychopaths or subcriminal psychopaths because they haven't been arrested yet. Keyword yet, is that they can keep their eyes on the prize. They don't necessarily, like, something doesn't go their own way, something doesn't go their way, and the successful psychopaths don't end up killing their girlfriend. And I say that lightly, that is actually true. Like, the people who hit the higher in the scale, the more violent they become. They're extremely impulsive. They get angry, they solve it. Not in the best of ways. So the real question becomes, the real question becomes what's the difference between them? And like I said, they have a biological advantage. Awesome. They have a biological advantage to that. And so there are a few things in the brain. We're going to talk about 2 of them today that actually makes them different. The first one being the prefrontal cortex. There are a couple parts, but we're going to call it prefrontal cortex in general right now. Psychiatrists looked at this and they found psychopaths actually have like smaller gray matter in the prefrontal cortex than non-psychopaths. And what this actually means is the prefrontal cortex is known for things like inhibiting inappropriate behavior, keeping down impulsiveness, things like that. So really and truthfully, they're predisposed to doing it. It's not upbringing. Like they're going to do it. It doesn't matter. And so this is what gives them their impulsive behavior, their idea that killing is okay, and a number of things. The other big one, and probably the bigger part of it, is the amygdala. The amygdala is about the size of a thumbnail. It's in your brain, obviously. And what this does is the amygdala is actually responsible for the formation and the activation of emotional memory. And for us, so like, if you have an emotional event like a baby being born or whatever, it's recorded in this area of the brain. Now, the thing about it is that for psychopaths, this doesn't work. It's there, but it doesn't work for them. And this is shown. Hare again did what they call an EEG, and they hook a whole bunch of things up to your skull, and it measures the electrical impulses in it. And so what he did was he did this in prison in the 60s. So that's probably the reason why he at least got away with some of it, is that he would hook people up to it. And he would shock them with something that was extremely painful, not life-threatening. It just really, really hurt. And he would count down from 10, and he says, when I reach 0, I am going to give you a shock that really sucks. And for normal people, the closer he would get, they would kind of brace themselves for it. Like they would kind of like suck it up, and you know, their brain would fire, saying like something is coming. With psychopaths, it doesn't happen. Like he would tell them, and they would know that it's coming, but they would still be perfectly relaxed. Their brain never once said, hey, something bad's going to happen. Maybe you should do something about it. Along with this, they did a thing called the startle reflex test. And so how many people, everybody here go to a horror movie? At least one time in their life? Yes, good. Okay, so what happens in horror movies? Like their whole concept is to scare you, right? And so the way that they do it is that they build up to that moment. They get you on the edge of your seat, and then at that exact moment, they bam, and they do the thing, and everybody jumps. And the real reason being is that you will react more when you're on edge about something, when you see something that's violent, or you see something that is not necessarily to your liking. Psychopaths, once again, are the opposite, especially when dealing with something that it's absolutely like horrifyingly and brutal. Going back to that question earlier, if you saw a really horrible scene, what would you do? The most violent ones would actually sit down and they say, well, it fascinates me. And they become so engrossed to it that external stimulus go away. Now, what this means is that psychopaths don't really have, deterrents are ineffective for psychopaths. If you tell them, hey, if you break the rules, you're going to go to jail, they may not like jail, but they won't get the emotional response of it. Which means that things that our entire society are based off of, it doesn't matter for them. They don't care. Like the threat of me going to jail, I don't want to go to jail. I'm probably no one in this room wants to go to jail. They don't care. Like it sucks for them, but it doesn't scare them. And the other thing that's kind of interesting is that treatment is often has undesired results with them. So one of the main things that they try and do in therapy or cognitive behavioral therapy is that they try to get you to realize your emotions. They try to get you to think about it. It's like, well, you know, you hurt that person. How do you think that person felt? And they try to get you in touch with that and say like, hey, maybe you should think about doing something differently than hurting the person next time because you've hurt them. And they try and get you to realize, you know, how you would feel. So there's a thing called the Oak Hill experiment. And if you go and look at this up, this is actually in Canada in the 60s. And we're going to ignore the fact that they did some really wacky stuff with like being naked and eating food through a straw for 10 days and doing lots of LSD. It's really weird. But what they did do is they tried to get psychopaths to recognize their emotions in each other and how they made each other felt. And at the end of it, they said, hey, these people are doing great. They've improved their behavior. Maybe we should let them loose. And so they let a lot of them go. What happened is that within psychopathic profiles, about 60 people have a recidivism rate, which means, you know, 60% of the people will end up committing a crime after they're released. After the Oak Hill experiment, it went up by 20%. 80% of those people actually had a recidivism rate. And so after they arrested someone, they kind of said, well, you know, what happened with the Oak Hill thing? And one of them finally admitted, they said, you know what? Actually, all of that therapy you sent us to, that made us better at being devious. It didn't teach us about ourselves. It taught us about other people and how to deceive them. And so it had the exact opposite effect. So with all of this, the interesting thing about it is that psychopaths actually look at things very pragmatically. And I'll leave off with this. A guy by the name of Kevin Dutton calls this the trolley problem. And so the first scenario he presents it with, he says, okay, so you've got a trolley going down the tracks. And at the end, the trolley has gone out of control. And at the end of the tracks, there are 5 people and they can't get off. The trolley will hit them and kill them. By you is a switch, and you can flip the switch and you can save the 5 people. The drawback is that when you flip the switch, there's the guy on the other end of the tracks, and that one person will die. What do you do? And so it's a very normally when you ask a question like this, because we're kind of removed from it, it falls into our prefrontal cortex. Do you save 5 people at the cost of 1, or vice versa? And they go through it. So the next step of this problem is where it gets really interesting. So same trolley problem, going down the tracks. 5 people are going to die unless you stop it. There's not a switch this time. However, there's a very large man that's standing next to you. And you can push that man in front of the trolley and it'll derail it, saving the 5 people. What do you do? To a psychopath, it's a question about pragmatism. If you take the emotional response out of it, it's the exact same question. It just happens to be the human interaction. The psychopath, 9 times out of 10, will most likely say, well, yeah, you push the guy in front of the tracks. You're sacrificing 1 to save 5. To them, it's not even a question. So let's take it a step further. So what if you're a doctor and a patient comes into your office and you have 5 other patients who are going to die unless they get transplants. And this one patient who comes into your office happens to meet the criteria for saving all 5 other patients. What do you do? Assuming that you won't get caught by killing this individual. Do you let him go, or do you quietly hide the body and save your other 5 patients? So the real question about this is what do we do and where do we go? The unfortunate part about it is that because it's due to genetics, like they're always going to be around. Psychopaths, like we'll never get rid of them. Even oh, I jumped. They really do. They'll be around. They'll always be predators for the rest of us. They'll hunt out the weak people of the herd. And what's really sad is that even if society changes, they won't. They'll always be here. And they, like I said, they've shown that. They'll even if we change how we parent, they'll still be. They'll still pop up. So the unfortunate part about them is that really all we can do is just learn that they exist, and we learn to cope with them and adapt. And unfortunately, like they're so good at it, they are the wolves in sheep's clothing. And when we eventually find out, it's normally too late. But they'll always be there. Questions? Oh, question. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Sorry. So I guess I'm out of time. But if you have questions, I'll be in the hall or around. So thanks. Oops.